Hello everyone, welcome back to Chill Deal Trades, where I analyze stocks so you know what's going on. Today we're going to be doing an update video on one of my favorite stocks, which is CHPT, which is ChargePoint. We're going to be covering some recent news, recent insider buying, while also looking at the charts to figure out where the stock could be headed. If you're here and you haven't hit the sub button, go ahead and smash it and join the squad. We're growing, we're on the way to 500, that's the goal. So if you can hit the sub button for daily videos and join the squad. But let's jump into things. So the first thing I want to look at is just institutions. So I made a video a couple weeks ago showing that there was some a pretty decent backlog. When we look back in a couple quarters, a lot of institutions jumping in. And now I want to look at this big pullback, and over the last month or so, what are we seeing on this dip? Because I think if we're seeing a lot of institutional buying, we could definitely have some buying pressure coming into the next couple months. So let's take a peek. The first thing I want to look at is on 7/6. We did have this investment company come in and buy up 11% of the business, which is pretty significant. So that's pretty recent and on the dip. So that's a pretty big deal. And then we come more recently, say over the last, the beginning of Q3, which is the beginning of the month of 7, and even the end of last quarter, we see so much green. So some of this was during the peak. People started buying. There's a lot of puts in here actually, but there's also there's a few calls and a lot of new positions. So people have been buying in kind of when it was pushing back up, but also buying into this dip into this quarter. A couple more recent ones, that sold out, but we're seeing a lot of buys in a variation. Some are a little bit bigger, 11 million shares, and some are smaller positions, but we're seeing a lot of green, and that's very positive. And a lot of these SPACs that kind of reverse merge, one thing I'm keeping a close eye on institutions, because there's so many of them. There's thousands of them this year, or just over the last couple years. I mean, there's a couple thousand of them and a few hundred just this year already. And so when I'm looking at SPACs and companies, I'm looking at the fundamentals, but I'm also looking at institutions and seeing what institutions are doing. And those are the SPACs, reverse merge SPACs, that I want to be a part of. So the next thing I want to look at is just the recent news that came out. So recently, I think it was yesterday, or today maybe even. Yeah, today. I think the news came out yesterday, but ChargePoint is buying a European charging software startup. So this is a really, really major deal. And the main reason it's a big deal is because ChargePoint is talking about how they're wanting to really expand internationally. And so if you don't know, I talked about it in my last video. Go look at that, where I break down more of the fundamentals of the company. But ChargePoint is about 70% of the US market as of today. But a big part of them expanding is going international. And buying this European company, which is both the stations and the software, is really going to help them propel their growth or accelerate their growth into Europe. So that's going to be a really big deal for their business as they grow. Another kind of interesting point I want to bring up is that the startup that they're buying, let me see where it is in the notes. The early investor was VW Group, which, Volkswagen, you know who that is, which is in the car industry. So the more strategic partners that ChargePoint can make within the car industry is only going to accelerate their growth. Because if you're thinking in the future, all these car companies that I mentioned in my last video on ChargePoint, they're all going EV. And the winner of the EV race in terms of charging is going to be the person who has the most partnerships with companies. Because if you think about a car, every cars have screens now. When you go in there, and if you have something built into your car, say with ChargePoint, where it's going to show you all the ChargePoint locations in your car, that's where you're going to go. So the more partnerships they can make, both domestically in the US and internationally, is really going to accelerate their growth. And so that's the news and institution I really wanted to cover. But I want to take most of this video to jump into the charts. So the first thing I want to look at is how we're looking. So more on the daily time, but we'll break it down as well. So as you can see, we came back to pretty close to oversold on this big market pullback the other day, which was pretty insane. And we've seen in the past that it can hang down there a little bit, but we're seeing a pretty big curve up. So the first thing that we're going to want to see on the daily, if this is a true correction back to the upside, we've broken this trend line, which is a positive, this first one, but we are coming up on a second downward trend line. It's pretty steep, so it's going to be pretty hard for it to stay under this unless we get a lot more selling pressure in the market. But we need to get above this range on RSI. If we come up here and get rejected and come back down, we're still in a downward phase technically. So we're going to need to break up the above there. The second thing is we did see that MACD went negative on the daily. So there's a lot of still negative momentum, but MACD can often be a lagging indicator, and so we need to pair that up with other metrics. So we're broken a trend line, that's positive, that's showing positive momentum. I would say what's more important is breaking this trend line to the upside, and we'll start to see that MACD curl up more into the positive. So those are a few things I'm looking on the daily. I brought up one EMA, the 200 EMA, to kind of get an idea if we push up higher where we could go. So we go down to, I think it's a 4 hour, we kind of have, and this is, I don't know if this is truly a cup, but we kind of have this small cup, and we have a little bit of handle here. So if we get follow through tomorrow or the next day, we'll probably have at least a $2 jump. So typically you take the depth of the cup, which is about $2, and that's the move up that you'll have, which is about $2 to 26 bucks. So in the short term, I'm looking for about $26, and when we go to the daily, we actually have the 200 EMA at about $26. So we have the 200 EMA, we have if the cup and handle breaks to the upside, $2 push, and we have a really significant resistance point, which would become here. We have all this little candle range that couldn't break above 26. So I would say in the short term, we're going to look for the 26 because all these things are going to be happening. We're hitting that, we're hitting that, we're hitting a trend line. There's all these things happening at once. And I think once we get to 26, if we get that high over the next couple days, we're going to get a really good indicator of where the stock could be headed next. If it breaks up above 26 and continues to have positive momentum out above these trend lines, above the 200-day, which would be really significant, and moving higher over the next couple months. So those are some things we're going to look at. Now I want to look at mostly just focusing on the moving averages and kind of what the chart is showing us, as well as some trend lines. So I mentioned it in my last video, but the one thing that I mentioned is that we really needed to hold this long-term trend line back from at $10 when the SPAC first developed. They all start at $10, and so we saw that we actually held that trend line, which is really bullish. The longer the trend line, the more impact it has on the stock, and if we can hold those long-term trend lines, it kind of supersedes the more short-term trend line. So that's really positive. We do have another trend line when we come from this point that comes up through. You kind of see that we broke below it, but it had a really important candles. So we're going to want to keep a track of this as we break higher. Obviously I said 26 in the other chart, but as we move up, we're going to see about the 28 range. We'll probably test it in a couple weeks if we continue to move higher. So those are some things we want to keep an eye on. When we look at the daily for the EMAs, I want to do EMAs because they're more short term, and I think that's a better tool to be using for this stock. So the first one we have is the 200-day, as I just mentioned, at 26, and then we have the 100-day and the 200-day, both at about $28. So we have all the EMAs pretty close within $4, and we have a lot of resistance. So you can see this whole range, it's super busy. There's a lot of candles everywhere. This is at the 28 where the EMAs are. So I would say 26 to that 28 range. If we do see upside, it's going to be really hard for the stock to get above that. Obviously, I think we could head into a little bit more positive. I still think there could be downside in the market, even though we've had a really bullish recovery off the drop on Monday. So this is just a couple updates. It doesn't mean anything's recovered. And that's why I wanted to look at the RSI and the MACD, is to really tell, like, we're still bearish based on momentum, but we're showing some positive signs. You know, you don't want to bite the bullet too early because it could hurt in a couple weeks potentially. But these are where the EMAs are, and we want to keep an eye on that. The 20 days also up here at the 50 days. So when we go next, I want to go to the 4 hour to see if we've tested any EMAs yet. Let me go to the 20-day here, because the 20 day is a really important one we need to keep track of. The 20-day, this is the one that the stock more constantly hits. And so one thing I do want to call out is on the 4 hour candle, we haven't hit the 20-day since July 21st. So, or yeah, that's about, is that July 21st? Oh, July 2nd, sorry, July 2nd. And so it's been about 20 days since we hit that. And we also see the 20-day on the 4 hour at that 26 price point. So I would say this 26 is probably going to be the magnet in the short term that you want to keep an eye on. That's on the 4-hour candle. We go to the 1 hour. We broke above the 20, which is bullish, but as I mentioned before, the longer time frames supersede it. So we'll have to see where the next resistance is, which if we look at the 100-day and the 200-day, let's see where the 50-day is, just for reference. I think it's above them, but let's take a peek. 50-day, we're coming up on the 50-day. So that's going to be an important on the hourly. And then at 26, 100-day, 28, 200-day, I think is correct. So again, if we break higher at 26 to 28 range, we're going to have a lot of resistance, so keep an eye on that. That's all I want to cover, just an update video on some things happening, as well as diving in a little bit more intricate. But thanks for watching the video. I really appreciate all you guys coming back here. And if you're new, or if you've been here and you hit the sub, please hit the sub button. And lastly, join our Discord. We always talk about stocks. ChargePoint is one of our favorites, so join the Discord. The link is in the description. And then lastly, I started a Patreon, so you can support the channel that way if you want. If you've been watching videos and any of my videos have helped you make some money in the market, I do this all for free, just in my free time, to help you guys out and teach you, and hopefully you learn something beneficial from it. So you can, that's in the description as well, and you can support me through Patreon. That's all I have for you guys. I make a video a day, so I'll see you again tomorrow.